And we are just so grateful to have you both here. I've got a few slides that I'd like to share just to give some background on the issue. I'll try and be brief. Daniel, if you could allow screen sharing, would be wonderful. Thank you all for joining us during the State of the Union. I see that we're competing against President Biden, so we really appreciate you. I know if you're here, it's because you really care about our local public schools. Daniel, I still need to be able to share my screen. Alrighty, there we go. Thank you everybody for your patience. All right, thumbs up if you can see my screen. All right, thank you. All right, so here we are. Just a little bit of background setting. Arizona has the most unevenly or inequitably funded schools in the entire nation. We are about $4,000 per student shy of the national median in terms of funding for our students. We know that this chronic lack of funding has led to lower test scores, a loss of quality teachers, and low graduation rates. And we know that school performance obviously correlates really closely with the level of district poverty. And when we're talking about schools, hi, Dr. Streeter. We've got Dr. Streeter here with us from Marana School District also. So we know that our schools that are receiving D and F ratings are working just as hard as everybody else. They're just severely lacking in terms of resources. And there are some solutions on the table that we can talk about tonight. There are several bills that have been filed in the state legislature that have not gotten a hearing that would provide additional funding for students in poverty. Sometimes we call that an opportunity rate. And there are other models that can be successful, but this bill is not that model. This bill is being pushed by Governor Ducey. It would force school takeovers or closures for low-income schools. We know that our urban, rural, and indigenous communities will be the most impacted. We know that our low-income students need significantly more resources, but instead of doing that, this bill is threatening school takeovers by in-state and out-of-state operators with very little to no accountability for millions to hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars. The bill is HB 2808, and this is the center of this entire town hall. And it is a very complicated bill. It's 50 pages long, which is uncharacteristically long. It hasn't really gone through much of a stakeholder process. It's being shoved through very, very quickly. There are a lot of questions that have not been answered. But let me give you just the very basic gist. Did my screen unshare? Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't know. So DNF rated schools in Arizona under this bill would have only 3 years in order to achieve A, B, or C rated status, or they would be removed from their local school district, which would really tear apart our local districts. I've worked in an A-rated school, a D-rated school. I can tell you that teachers are working just as hard, families are working just as hard, so are students. These schools would be forced into a quote unquote partnership model where they would partner with another district, or a fresh start model, which could mean an in-state or out-of-state charter operator who would receive quite a lot of money in order to take over that school. And what this bill does is it removes local control. It would put schools under new management that could completely override local school boards and superintendents. They could hire and fire staff, and they can cancel and renegotiate contracts in whatever way, shape, or form they wish, with no opportunity for community input like a local public school would have. And the last point I'll make is that this takeover model has been deployed and has failed in several states around the country already. It's important to note that in Mississippi, Texas, North Carolina, and Tennessee, we've seen very little results and a lot of money poured into these failed experiments. So it's cost taxpayers billions of dollars, creating chaos in communities, and has left student outcomes unchanged, and has really torn apart our communities. So with that, I want to get to our panel, the most important part. With that background, if you would like to type questions into the chat, there's a Q&A function. I will monitor it as best as I can and type in some answers, and then ask our panelists. So thank you all again. Let me unshare my screen so we can see our amazing panelists. Hi, everyone. So just to reiterate, we have Dr. Trujillo from Tucson Unified School District. We have Dr. Streeter from Marana Unified School District. We have Dr. Wilson from Buckeye Elementary School District. And we have Joe Baya, who is a school board member in Kienta and a parent as well. So I asked all of these fine people to be on this panel because their local school districts and communities will be some of the most impacted in the state. And so it really matters to hear from them. So I will start off asking, the most important question, which is, what factors most directly impact school letter grades in your experience? Dr. Trujillo, I see you're off mute. Do you want to get us started?
I'll go ahead and get you started because that question blends right into my challenges and issues with this bill. And for me, there's a reason why, Beth, everything that you said about this being a failed experiment, it means that it's probably going to lead to the same failed outcomes here in Arizona, because this bill is born of a certain mindset that the governor has. The governor is certainly not, in my opinion, an anti-education governor. What he is a former CEO of Cold Stone Creamery. And coming from the business community and just being on the conservative side of the aisle and being more business-minded, the tendency is to view public education through a business lens. How many times have we heard run it like a business? This is a run it like a business bill. The problem is schools are not businesses. You do not control the means of production. We're not a factory. We're not Cold Stone Creamery, where you can assign key performance indicators to the amount of staff that you have, to the amount of machinery that you have, to the amount of product that you are refining. Children, students, and young people, they are the vehicles of the product that we deliver called knowledge. And the reason we're not a business is because every single child is different. And we do not control the means of production in a very, very important component that determines the final quality of the product that we deliver, which is learning and knowledge. Means of production and variables of production like poverty, like a child's reading level coming into school, gaps in schooling, the educational level and the access that a student has to high quality learning resources in the home, or the educational attainment level of the parent, the zip code for which the student lives. All of that also determines the extent to which you have highly qualified staff in a school. And these are all very, very determinants of the extent to which you're going to show student growth and student achievement, particularly in a D and F rated school. This is a bill that is born of a business mindset, and it's being applied to schools where teaching and learning are the products, where we don't control a large portion of these variables that really determine our success, especially when you're working with populations that are highly impoverished, where you have gaps in learning, where you have a transient population. Because what is the number one resource that you have that will yield the greatest impact? It's the classroom teacher. So when you're in these schools and you have a student body that is more needs intensive, and you have a more punitive model for determining school letter grades and determining teacher performance-based pay, that doesn't necessarily romance the most highly qualified applicants to come and take teaching positions in your school or in this sector of your district. And I think that's another challenge, when you're talking about variables, the classroom teacher. And there's no secret as to why the majority of DNF schools, not just in TUSD, but in the state, are also the schools that have the highest percentages of teacher vacancies. So this bill presents sort of a double, triple whammy, but when talking about you will improve in 3 years, but really not openly providing schools and districts with the resources that they're going to need to deal with a lot of the endemic issues that stand in the way of student success in a lot of these schools.
Right, absolutely. Thank you for that really robust answer. I think that speaks to a lot of our districts, like you said, not just Tucson. Dr. Wilson, would you like to add some thoughts there about your experience in the West Valley?
Sure. Thank you, Beth, for having me, and I'm happy to be here with my colleagues. The question is really, you ask about what factors most directly impact school letter grades, and we know here in Arizona the school letter grades are incumbent on one test, and so given that, I think it's important to say equitable and excellent teaching learning environments that support every student it is really what that, and Gabe talked about that, equitable and excellent teaching learning environments. And we know we have to have additional dollars to hire effective teachers. And those teachers have to have access to rigorous curriculum. Our students have to have mental health support services. Being an elementary district, we know that it's super important to have preschool programs available. And, I know that my colleagues here are from unified school districts, and I was doing a little bit of research about what about graduation rates. So we have students who, because they're perhaps living in impoverished environments, we know that with extra support and dollars, that students that receive that extra dollar or opportunity weights, those graduation rates can be increased by from 6.8% to 11.5%. So what Gabe was talking about, Arizona is one of 9 states that doesn't provide additional dollars for students who live in poverty. Now, one thing I will say is our district is part of Project Momentum, which is Governor Ducey's sort of like a poverty weight, where students are receiving $150 per student as an additional dollar to help them perform, help them get the necessary support that they need. And teachers receive additional support to collaborate, to look at assessments. And basically what we're doing with our D schools, and mind you, we had an F because of the 2-year rule. So a school that is a D 2 years in a row, and they missed the D, they missed a C by 1 point. So they were automatically a D. And then if you're a D 2 years in a row, you're an F. So long story short, you get some extra dollars, you help your kids do well, you hire teachers, you pay them to perform better. That essentially is like a poverty weight. And this bill, with its 50 pages and extra things in it that is not necessary, and I think someone mentioned earlier that there's not a lot of accountability in it. What we mean by that, Project Momentum has accountability, has the metrics, has the track record of success, and in partnership with other districts that have had success, you have districts like myself and others who are seeing they're seeing students increase their performance on assessments, and more importantly, have success in the classroom. So to kind of go full circle, when you talk about what directly impacts a school letter grade, it really comes down to effective teachers and giving those teachers time to collaborate. And that's what Project Momentum has done for us.
So good to hear about success stories and to hear what can be done. Those statistics that you shared are really inspiring. I'm a teacher in the classroom, and I want to see that for every kid in our state. Dr. Streeter, how about you? Do you have anything you'd like to add in terms of your area?
Yeah, well, I think what we're talking about is what are the factors that impact letter grades, right? And here we are at the, coming off of 2 years of school being unlike anything we've seen before, and we're back in the letter grade conversation. We haven't had A through F letter grades since the 2018-2019 school year. Now we're looking at a new assessment that we haven't seen yet. We haven't gone through this cycle yet. Essentially, what we're doing in Arizona is we're creating a system that continues to move away from growth, which actually should really be the ultimate measure of any type of school effectiveness. We've already seen in this state through the results-based funding initiative that all we really keep doing is recalculating disadvantages and rewarding pre-existing opportunities. So what factors impact letter grades? It's access to opportunity. That's what the factors are that impact letter grades. I've been fortunate in my career. I've worked in a few different districts that have had schools that had high free and reduced lunch percentages, but also had high achievement, essentially beating the odds. But they did that because they had great teachers and they had great principals. But these opportunities can look very different to different schools and different districts. And I think we need to come to that understanding. In our district, I worry about two of our elementary schools under this bill, Picture Rocks Elementary and Roadrunner Elementary. These are C schools back in school year 18-19, but I've also seen how they've been impacted by the pandemic. I've seen the literacy gaps that our students are experiencing because they were impacted differently than some of our other schools. And rather than our focus being on that, we're trying to come up with a punitive measure here. The reality is Picture Rocks Elementary, that's an elementary school that covers 157 square miles on the western edge of our district, basically covering the desert. Roadrunner Elementary covers 117 square miles. Again, west edge of our district, covering really our desert communities. And pre-pandemic, these were schools that had free and reduced lunch populations of 77% and 82% respectively. They were schools that had mobility rates that were between 20% and 30%. And both schools have special education rates that are at or above 20%. When you look at opportunity, and I'll talk a little bit about Roadrunner, this is a campus, or this is a community in which the crime rate is 34% higher than the national average. The median income is 60% lower than the median income for the rest of the town of Marana. The nearest library is 14 miles away. The nearest doctor is 14 miles away. The nearest grocery store is 11 miles away, and the nearest ER is 17 miles away. These are factors that impact letter grades. And perhaps we should be looking at how can we invest and set aside $150 million to solve some of these issues, rather than come up with punitive measures to continue to go down the wrong path with how we're treating our schools.
A quick follow-up question. I agree with you that we shouldn't be going back to the letter grade debate, and we shouldn't be talking about a bill that pairs data from 2019 with data from 2022 and starts a brand new model based on that. It's absolutely crazy. But to Christy's point, 1 point can dictate a letter grade or even a decimal. So can you shed a little bit of light on, what is that system arbitrary? Is it fair? What does that kind of look like going forward if the stakes are this high?
So I'll answer that, and then I'll turn this over to Dr. Wilson, Dr. Trujillo. But what I first want to say is, everybody here is in favor of accountability. I think accountability is good. Our community wants accountability. But I think what we want to do is move away from punitive measures and punitive recalculating of opportunities, right? So that 1 point that Dr. Wilson talked about, yes, it does matter. There is an impact on that. And this bill provides a pretty significant impact that could really decimate a community and provide a lot of stress on a community. I'm going to tell you today at 2 o'clock, Roadrunner Elementary dismissed 355 students. Over 250 of those students went immediately to their after-school program on that campus because that's where their needs are best met. We don't want to punish these pieces. We want to keep finding ways to support all of our schools and support each other through critical partnerships, not punitive measures.
I'll just jump in on for a second here on, I think it's important. So you have your federal requirements as well. So you have, and I like what Dr. Streeter said about accountability, because sometimes sometimes people think we're, afraid of the accountability, and we aren't. We welcome accountability. We want to show that, that kids are making progress. We take kids from point A to point B, where sometimes I think people, sometimes it just gets lost, is that kids that live in poverty or have less access, or we're trying to help people to understand where the opportunity is their starting points are a little different, and their hurdles or their potholes around the track are in the way. And so we get into a conversation with people about proficiency and growth. And growth is so important. And we want to make sure that it doesn't go away when we're talking about assessments, especially with teaching and learning. We want to, and I think most people understand this, that especially from a teacher's point of view, when you take a student, when a student comes into your classroom, whether you've had the student for a long time, or they're new to your district, or you're new to your classroom, and you take them from point A to point B, and they experience a ton of growth. There's a big debate in education around whether that growth should count the same as proficiency. And so in Arizona, with the letter grade system, there's just a big debate over proficiency and growth. And in our district, and I can just speak for my district alone, growth is a really important measure because of where our students are. Proficiency is important too. And the reason I'm going to go back to Project Momentum is it kind of proves the point. We have had success with Project Momentum because one of the factors I strongly believe in is we volunteered. We said we need help. We partnered. We were not told we have to do this. We partnered with another group of experts in school improvement and said, come alongside us. We have people in our district that needed some support. And the additional dollars for the students, not only were the students benefiting, but we did have to have a measure to show that they're benefiting, and that happens to be a standardized test. Along the way are formative assessments so that teachers can then improve their craft along the way. And I'm kind of getting in the weeds here, but I think it's important that people understand that that's the accountability piece. That's what holds the system accountable. The reason that is important in this bill is what they want to do is they want to bring in a new system that is not tied to accountability. It has not ever been tried. They want to bring in a fresh start school. They want to bring in this achievement accountability achievement district. None of that school improvement model that they want to bring in with this bill has ever been tried. To my point is, why do you want to do that? Well, part of the reason is they want to bring in a $2,000 per student for one time, which there's not enough money in this bill to scale up Project Momentum, and because there's around 75,000 students in D and F schools in Arizona. So if you just do the math on that, there's not enough money. So there's an ulterior motive there. And the funding that funding I just spoke about goes directly to private companies in state or out of state, to which there's no accountability. So why wouldn't we advocate for a program like Project Momentum, where there's accountability, there's metrics, there's a partnership with a district that's volunteering, that's already tried, that's already proven, that already has built-in metrics, versus a model that is not tried, that brings in private companies to scale up charter schools.
Right. I couldn't agree more. And I think, if we're doing these tests and these pilots of Project Momentum and we find success, why not build on that success? I mean, that's, even if you do want to run things like a business, that's a great way to run a business. Instead of pulling in a new huge experiment that could really fail a lot of people. I want to talk a little bit about the human impact. We have Joe Baya here, who is a wonderful school board member from Kienta and a parent. And I crunched some numbers. I did some research. It looks as though there are 22 schools that would be subject to this takeover model on the Navajo Nation out of 77. So what that means is that that's about 1/4 of the public schools in the Navajo Nation that could be subject to this model, including out-of-state charter operators coming in. So I want to hear directly from Joe about what that impact might mean for his community. Joe?
Thank you, Beth. Hello, everyone. So yeah, I'm up here in Kienta, Arizona. It's a wonderful, cool day. I wanted to share what it is that I see on the Navajo Nation. I grew up here in Kienta. I graduated from the school system up here. I returned to share as much time and invest as much time in the community that gave so much to me. Now, what I see and what I've heard from a lot of different families, the school system here is very important. A lot of the families here, there are multi-generations in the home. And when you have that type of a system and you have a school system that is the only school system around here, we have a boarding school, but that's only through 8th grade. Now, the higher education, the higher grade levels, a lot of those families, they're working in the community, they're traveling for work. And I heard some of the other superintendents mention how much of a strain it puts on some of the community when you have kids coming home early. And if we don't have after school programs, a lot of those students are coming home early. And there's not a lot for them to do in the community right now. We're on the Navajo Nation. We do have a lot of stay-at-home orders that have impacted a lot of the facilities, the programs around the Navajo Nation. So a lot of those programs, a lot of those activities that students would normally be involved in, they're not available to those students. Let's say if they were in a more urban environment, they would actually have more options in the city to do something after school. But here in my community, and I know there's other communities like this, a lot of those kids really see the school as something that's so important to them. There's a big cultural element there as well. We have a big focus on our Navajo education and our culture, the Navajo language. Right now, I know that we've come a long ways to ensure that, that focus, those cultural elements, that's important and relevant to, the identity of the majority of the students in this region and the families in this region. They're predominantly Navajo. And we're in a very rural, isolated area. If we're going to have to change the way that we're running our school, I could see that, panning out in many different catastrophic ways. One impacting elemental cultural aspects. But again, this is a huge bill. I'm not a lawmaker. That's beyond the scope of my understanding. But I know in our small community, big changes don't always go the way we want it to. And out here in this rural area, I know that we're struggling to make up for the years of education that the students have been put behind. And we don't have a lot of good internet in this area. A lot of times, some of the students, you may have multiple people in the family trying to connect on Zoom. And if the school's not open and students are virtual learning, that's a big impact. We talked about what's an impact to the education. One of those things is internet. A lot of families want their kids to be in school because if their students are at home, they can't get a good quality education. So some of the other factors, again, we do have multi-generational homes. where we're scared. We want to make sure that the kids have, they're not at risk of getting sick with COVID, and that puts a lot of strain on the families at home. So there's a lot of people are scared. A lot of people don't have access to good information out here on the reservation. And in my community, I know I'm working on sharing more information. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share some information, Beth.
Thank you so much, Joe. Somebody made the point in the chat that, having an outsider come in and decide how to educate a community rarely goes well historically. So I'm hearing from you that would be something that could really break up your community. I haven't heard from Dr. Trujillo in a little bit, so I want to check in and get your sense of how this could impact families in Tucson in particular.
Well, in a lot of ways, the Tucson Unified Community is emblematic of the beauty of the diversity of our nation. We are home to one of the largest refugee populations in the state. We just finalized the intake over the last 8 weeks of just shy of 230 Afghan refugee kids that have been resettled, largely in our K-5 and our K-8 schools. We house one of the state's largest populations, with pride, I will say, of students with disabilities at just shy of 7,000, ranging from severely autistic to ED to medically fragile. We have one of the largest English language learner populations in the state. Not to mention, we're the proud schools of choice for the Pasquayaqui tribe and the Townhall Nation. And these are very, very unique and special communities that require a lot of care and cultural competency and awareness when you work to serve them. And having an out-of-state outsider come in with a business mindset and say, educational framework A worked in this environment in Maryland, and I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to move it over to Southwest Tucson, and it's going to work for the Pasquayaqui schools. It's going to work for Lawrence and work for Johnson. Really flies in the face of everything that we stand for as public educators. It flies in the face of everything we believe in with regard to equity, with regard to cultural responsiveness. And that, to me, is probably one of the more destructive aspects of this bill. Our communities and our staff that serve these communities know the needs of our children and our communities best. And what they need is support, they need resources, and they need time. I think Christy said it best. I join her and I join ASA. I know Christy's proudly served as president there for a long time. We've never been against accountability. I've never been against accountability. We welcome accountability, but we also want to be at the table when the framework for that accountability and the measure for it is developed, to bring in a brand new assessment that has not been administered in Arizona districts before, on the heels of a worldwide pandemic that has really taken thousands of students across TUSD and many more across Arizona out of the classroom for 18 months, devoid of any access in a lot of corners of our district to internet or online learning, and in the face of a nationwide teacher shortage and beyond teacher shortage, labor shortage, bus drivers, counselors, social workers. We're struggling to get food service. We're struggling to get HVAC techs. We're struggling to get a lot of our positions filled. And then to say that you're going to take this test, we're going to assign you a grade, and you've got 3 years to work yourself out of it. I think, to me, it's hard not to view that as an intentional attempt to open the door for a scale up of private and charter schools and an eventual transition to a for-profit model. Because I do believe that the business mindset, not only the run it like a business mindset that's applied to schools that are struggling, that's applied to DNF schools. Well, what's the cousin of that? Well, the cousin of that is, let's let the private sector foster the competition necessary to create a superior product. And we know what happens in that privatized model. Those with means and those with access will flourish. The students of Tucson Unified, my students with disabilities, Afghan refugees, refugee students at large, English language learners, those coming from poverty, are not going to be best served by that model. So honestly, we define student achievement here by growth. And I know that there's passionate arguments on both sides about proficiency versus growth, but we define student success as learning. And we define teacher excellence by the extent to which teachers take their students at the beginning of the year from point A to point B in English language arts and in math and in writing. And we want to continue to do so. We advocate for a state accountability model that celebrates growth versus a punitive letter grade that's based solely off of a student's ability to take a test at a particular given point in time.
I can tell from the chat that people are really fired up about your responses. And I mean, I couldn't agree more. I know when you worked with those settling refugee communities, the thought never entered your mind that that could potentially, because of a language barrier, could potentially affect your school letter grades. We as public school educators don't think that way, right? Our first thought is, absolutely, they're kids. They live in my district. Let's meet them where they are and help them grow. And I think that's it's not understood at the Capitol. I see a lot of really great comments about growth and about how that should be the only factor. And I really appreciate those. I had a specific question for Dr. Wilson, saying from Caitlin, I enjoyed listening to you speak and defend project momentum and accountability. Can you speak specifically to the issue of attrition in your district or others? How often does staff leave to work for other schools that can offer more competitive pay? So maybe just like the larger global issue of sometimes when we have those models, teacher attrition can be a major issue.
So over the last few years, we really haven't had a lot of staff turnover. We've done a pretty good job keeping staff. This year, I think is going to be a little more difficult. I think everyone's going to have a harder time with keeping staff, just for a variety of reasons. I think the teaching profession is in trouble. I think the profession, just for everyone, I think that it's just tough, and bills like this don't make it easier. I think that language in this bill kind of makes people fearful of the unknown. It puts pressure on people to perform. You know, as I talk to people and teachers, people want kids to do well. Superintendents want principals to do well. We all want kids to succeed. We want to succeed. You know, it's not like we walk around hoping that kids fail. But the thing of it is, and even before COVID, you know, it's no surprise that we were starting to see a retention and recruitment issue with teachers. It's a balance of trying to help. This isn't a COVID issue. It's been exhausted in COVID. It's a balance of trying to help people to understand that you have to meet kids where they are, and then you have to have the resources to help them grow. And we'll kind of go back to the point that we were already talking about, that they need more and teachers need more. And so, when you're a growing district, and we're fortunate enough that we have a lot of growth and we're building schools, and we're trying to hire more teachers, that the issue is that we need effective teachers and we need highly qualified staff. And with that, when you have schools that are challenged with poverty and challenged with turnover and, just all these challenges that we've already talked about, you need more resources. And so again, I'm going to kind of go back and sound like I'm beating the drum, but the thing about Project Momentum that has proven, and I'm not the only district in Arizona that has the success of Project Momentum, there's other districts. It proves the point that the additional resources do work. And, it helps the teachers plan and perform and meet and look at assessments. And so it kind of proves the point that, okay, so why wouldn't we scale that? and have other districts like my friends with Dan and Gabe that are saying, you know, I want to prevent failure, and I want to partner with Christie or partner with another district so that we don't have to have more schools, you know, in failure status. I do want to bring up something that we haven't talked about yet in this bill that is seriously problematic, and that has to do with the ability for these achievement district and a Fresh Start to take over unoccupied space, or if they want to take over a building in your current school district. And so one thing that we've kind of focused on the teaching side of this, which is really important, and I'm glad we are doing that. But the other part is that the achievement district is given powers that if you're failing or you have a D school, they can force a school district to lease or sell part of your school district property. And I just want to remind folks that under local control, I mean, the last time I checked, we have a school board that, you know, we go out, we pass bonds, we use our override, we work really hard to save our money. Those are our buildings. So if we're forced by this achievement district to sell or lease part of our building, and let's say by chance that we then get our schools out of school improvement, well, we just had to be forced to sell our buildings, which then has a negative impact on how we work with the school facilities board, and can impact your building renewal grants, all of this. And that has a very, very serious negative impact on how you you know, financially are able to exist. So we haven't really talked about that. The other piece is the Achievement District is an unelected board appointed by the governor, made up of 9 people. And so that's like another little thing that is in this bill that is a serious flaw. And I don't know how many people really know that.
Yep, absolutely. And I think, you know, we've seen models that sort of take over like a wing of a school or a pod of a school. And I know, you know, I've heard stories about how that can really change the culture of a school, right? Like, I'm an Arizona Roadrunner. I have like 50 t-shirts in my closet. We've got our school chant. We've got our school song. Like, every teacher knows it. Every kid knows it. What happens when, you know, Basis R Us comes in and has their special little wing, or what happens to the school culture, and how do you prevent kids from feeling like it's you know, an us versus them or an elitism? I mean, there are a lot of factors at play. Also, an entire school being taken over within a district. How do you prevent families from having massive ebbs and flows and exoduses from one campus to the other? And how does the district kind of account for all of these, you know,
we're not allowed to have charters within our own districts. They took our ability away to do. We can't do that. But you can have this district, achievement district, or a Fresh Start, whatever. You can imagine imagine a school breaking away from your district and doing that. You know, the problems with that, basically having your own board, an achievement board, a Fresh Start school within your district. It's very problematic.
And I think we've seen, you know, with this bill in particular, there was very little stakeholder involvement or input. It's moving very quickly. Usually when you have a massive bill like this that has such wide scale repercussions for, honestly, for an entire generation of kids, we're not talking about a couple of years. These are 25-year leases. This is huge change. Usually when you see that, you are working through a stakeholder process with a lot of folks. It might take a year. And instead it feels to me like this is being passed quickly for a reason. And that stakeholder input was avoided intentionally, which, you know, I think speaks to the fact that if the public knows about this bill, they won't support it. I mean, for all of the reasons that we've heard here tonight, there's not a lot of good. So we're getting a lot of questions about, you know, standardized testing and and all of the ramifications. It's hard to sort of wrap this one up with a pretty bow because it's 50 pages long. But I think for the last question, I just want to ask, you know, if you could propose another solution or wave a magic wand at the legislature to have one wish to dramatically improve schools in your district that might, you know, score a little lower on standardized tests and have many, many more students who are low income, what would you do and why? Let's start with Dr. Streeter.
So yeah, and I think if I had a magic wand and I could wave it, it would probably be in hopes of addressing some of the things that have already been said, right? Despite the many issues with this bill, including how we're going to transfer taxpayer-held assets to another government entity or a private charter company, or who's going to handle the current tax burden on existing overrides and bonds, or why we seem to always be in this fight over every single dollar for one of the poorest funded education systems in the country, only then to commit $150 million to a previously failed strategy. We should be focusing, and I'm going to go based off of what Joe said, is we should be focusing on how we can best support our kids, how we can best support our schools, and how we can best support our communities. And back to Christy's earlier point, let's have conversations about what partnerships we can create to do great things for kids. Everybody on this call is here for kids. That's why you're dedicating your time this evening. Let's, you know, if I could wave my wand, I'd wave the wand and have a conversation about doing great things for kids, not trying to figure out how to line the pockets of private interests from out of state. So.
Absolutely. Dr. Wilson, to you.
Well, I think my friend Dan summed that up very nicely. I've kind of already mentioned this, but there are proven school improvement models out there, and nobody wants to fail. We're in a system where so much emphasis is put on how well somebody performs on one given day, you know, and that is just what it is. I don't think that's going away. I would like to see us study and learn from what we already know is true with a model like Project Momentum. And it is a partnership, a true partnership, voluntary, where you have, you know, I'll be the first to say you have some schools in my district that were not performing well. So again, we sought out experts in school improvement, and therein lies the partnership. But it is with dollars. So, but this idea of a punitive approach never works for anything in life. I think we all know that. And so if we could figure out a way to really embrace the partnership and then look at the models that are proven, that have evidence, and the metrics that are built in that have accountability and transparency. And I don't think we need to put all our eggs into a fresh start or an achievement district, which doesn't have any evidence that will work. There's no evidence across the country that anything like this works. So if I had a magic wand, I would be saying let's study and promote partnerships within our own leadership and promote the heck out of that.
Love that you emphasize the word voluntary. I think that is probably the key word, a voluntary partnership. Dr. Trujillo, what would be your, big wish?
My biggest wish, I wish one day I would wake up in the state of Arizona as a public educator, not even as a superintendent, but as a career educator that started in the classroom, as a paraprofessional, then as a teacher, then as a dean, then as an assistant principal, all the way up to a superintendent. I wish I could one day wake up in a state where my profession, my calling is not viewed as a tax burden. But again, I don't know if that'll ever happen, but if it did, I would love to stop being viewed as a tax burden, to be shifted, to be escaped from, and rather be viewed as an investment in the future of our state, the future of our nation. And to do that, my dream would be, first of all, you invest in early childhood education. Needs to be universal preschool for every single K-12 district in this state. You need to invest in high quality literacy instruction, K-3, based off of small group instruction, where we support our teachers with a parapro in every classroom with nothing higher than 15 students at the K-3 level. You need to dramatically expand the arts and career and technical education, especially for middle school all the way through 12th grade. And finally, we need to pay our teachers and professionalize them with salaries that say that you matter. And so for me, it's more than just adding a weight onto the Group A and Group B funding that we receive for the students. We need real investment. And yes, that means dollars, but it also means a belief, a fundamental belief that public education is the key to unlocking the power of our democracy at the local, state, and national level. And it gets discouraging at times because we're so far away from that. When I listen to Dr. Streeter, it takes me further and further away from that dream, that it's less about investing in the future of our state and more about lining the pockets of, the private sector and contributing to the deconstruction of the beautiful public education structure that has served our state well since our birth. So for me, that would be my ask for. And it sounds so simple because it is. We know that these things work.
Thank you so much. I can speak for everybody in the chat and everybody online that we very much appreciate your words and they resonate with us. Joe, last word here. What would you ask for your community and your children?
I can't go after Dr. Trujillo. Not that he just said that. No, I wish I could wake up one day and go to my board meeting and not have to hear about how a number of the job positions that we're seeking, as far as budget goes and competition for a community, we just don't have enough money to be competitive and get people from other parts of the state and the country to come to our rural school. We're trying to be competitive, and the lack of funding for those types of projects, different type of training opportunities, it always comes down to that. And there's this running joke because I came back to Arizona from Alaska, and as far as funding goes and money, I was in the private sector prior to coming in and serving my community. The board members are always teasing me and saying, put it on Joe's budget because my budget's the one that seems to be always overdrawn or overspent, but they're always teasing me about that. But it just comes down to funding the funds that we have, reallocating, constantly shifting, funding around for school. And we come from a community that has suffered tremendous poverty, and we've lost industries in our rural communities. And that has in turn created and exacerbated, this history of suffering for a lot of the people that are just trying to heal, and they just want their kids to get a decent education.
Thank you so much, Joe. Just in closing, I'm seeing a lot of questions about sort of like next steps and what comes next. So like I said, this was forced through pretty quickly. This has already been heard in the House Education Committee. It is being sponsored by one of our more, reasonable pro-public education lawmakers, which makes our battle more uphill. And I have to tell you, I think everybody on this call probably knows, but the only thing that moves the folks at the legislature is public pressure. It has historically been the only thing. And it doesn't mean that we all have to yell and scream, but we have to raise our voices. I did put a quick email tool in the chat. This could be heard on the floor any day. We were waiting to look at the calendar for Monday and Tuesday. And right now it seems as though they're stalled because of talks like these, right? Lawmakers were told, hey, superintendents are getting involved, volunteers, educators, parents are starting to learn about this, and they're asking a lot of questions. And this might not be a great look for you to, to vote on. And so I think it's important to reach out to your lawmakers and say, I heard about this bill. I do not support it. It hurts my school, or it hurts a school in my community, or it hurts, schools in Tucson or in Buckeye. It doesn't have to be your school for you to care about it. And I think that they are relying on people to not care because these are D and F rated schools. And those are our kids that need the most resources, and they need all of us to care and to speak up. So please do. And it needs to be quickly. I'm going to just underscore that we need to stop this bill in the House before it makes its way to the Senate. I am not optimistic that we have any chance of stopping it in the Senate. So the time is now to speak up. The time is now to educate folks at your schools, folks in your community. And I really appreciate you all being here. We launched this yesterday morning, and we're able to have almost 100 participants on this call within 24 hours. We were able to have these incredible panelists join us at a last minute's notice. And to me, it speaks volumes about how much people in this state really care about kids. And I know we can raise our voices to get much better solutions on the table than this. So thank you all for being here. Please be in touch. Please reach out on our website, Facebook, Twitter, you name it. I can connect you if you have questions specifically for a panelist. Whatever you need, don't hesitate to reach out. And with that, we're going to stop the recording, and we will put the video online for everybody to be able to access and share wherever you'd like. Yes, on Nextdoor, wherever.